welcome. I am so glad to be here. And I will say that I'm hoping we can get at least three dad jokes in this conversation, but we'll see how that works out. 18-year-old self is keep moving in the right direction, keep moving towards Jesus. I think a lot of the things that I was frustrated about when I was 18, I wanted to change overnight and realized that God was going to change over the rest of the days that He gave me on earth. And so continue making those changes, moving towards Him, and not being mad or antsy or anxious that I'm 18. Yeah, I think I went to Liberty, as you mentioned, and one of the amazing opportunities from that experience was that every week you're challenged with what seems like a very real opportunity to change the world. You're hearing from people who have made a global impact for the kingdom, and that's all of our goals as Christ followers. But in some ways, it felt discouraging if that global impact didn't seem to happen tomorrow. And realizing that following Jesus into whatever that next step He has for you is a really freeing thing. Now seeing as a 31-year-old how God has worked since I was 18 in these last 13 years in ways that are better than I could have expected, in ways that I've seen His hand. But it's been a slower process than I would have wanted as an 18-year-old. Yeah, so I was consistently in church as a child, and I went to a Christian school. I was really blessed to have grandparents that are believers, both on my mom and dad's side. They're all four of them are still alive. They are still following Jesus and godly examples. And then both my parents were strong believers as well. And I have an older sister who is wonderful. She's one of my closest friends, and she is a Christian too. And the reason I share that is, the Bible talks a lot about generational blessing. And I think that was one of the things that's been really amazing to see in my life is how I have a gift of those who have gone before me, really from both sides of the family that have followed Jesus and set out a great example. And so I was in a lot of those environments where I heard the gospel. I became a Christian when I was 8 years old, and that was a really personal decision for me. And then going into middle school, I know that's a big fast forward, but really began to get involved in youth ministry, which had a huge impact on my life of learning to follow Jesus on a daily basis outside of the walls of the church. And then really, really unexpectedly, after my ninth grade year of high school, felt the Lord call me into vocational ministry as a pastor, which is why now I'm the next gen pastor here at Park Ridge. And so it's been neat to see that journey. But, I think a lot of times we hope that our journey when we become a Christian is this major vertical leap that is just has a right trajectory the whole way through. But throughout high school and really ever since I've been a Christian, there has been different seasons and different moments where I haven't had always the best trajectory. And so continuing to see Christ's faithfulness despite my failure has been an amazing picture of grace that I've seen from him. And as I have seen him work in my life, there's been a greater desire to not walk in any of those directions away from him. So so it's neat that you asked that question because it wasn't pre-planned. I didn't know this was necessarily coming or anything like that. But last night, I was talking with the middle and high schoolers from First Timothy chapter 1. That's been something I've been thinking about this week. And it's Paul writing to Timothy that Christ came to save sinners. And you're probably familiar with this, but he identifies himself as the foremost. And I think what we believe about Jesus's response to sinners, even saints who are in sin, is crucial. Because here's what happens: a lot of us have a relationship with Christ, but if we've slipped up, or even if we feel like we have missed our devotion 3 days in a row, and if that's a big deal for us, and we're like, where do we go from here? That can seem devastating if we subtly believe that Jesus rejects sinners, or if we believe that as struggling saints that Jesus would push us away in hopes that we would clean our act up. But if we're in a season, or maybe it's been a few days, or maybe you're watching this and you're like, man, I literally am so disappointed in what the start of this year has been like for me spiritually. What you believe about Jesus's response to you coming to him with your need, with your sin, repenting, being vulnerable with who Jesus is, what you believe about that changes everything. And that's why Paul, when he was saved, he was on this road to Damascus. He was on his way into really some of the worst form of sin that you could imagine, and wanting to kill believers. And so in the middle of this, the grace of Jesus transforms him from the inside out. And that's what he's still doing today, even in the life of believers, as we're moving more and more into his likeness. Yeah, absolutely. Jesus is not shocked by the fact that as a Christian, you need him daily. And so I think that's one of the things why it's strange for us to convince ourselves of, all right, Jesus, we're grateful for our salvation, and if we read the Bible 20 days in a row, then we're good. And it's like, no, we are in desperate need of him to satisfy our souls every day. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so for me, like we mentioned, I was born and raised in North Carolina, and so I mentioned this earlier, but I had just finished my ninth grade year. We were off at a missions trip, and really, it was the last night of that trip. There was an invitation. Maybe if you've been in a church service before, and the pastor does kind of the close your eyes and raise your hands type thing, and so we get to that, and I'm expecting him to go through the normal gamut of if you're not a Christian, then this is a moment where you can get saved, and if you need to rededicate your life, that type of thing. But he got to the end, and something I hadn't expected, and he said, "I believe that there are some in this room that are called into pastoral, full-time vocational ministry." And in that moment, I felt the Holy Spirit speaking to me in a really clear way that I hadn't necessarily expected or been prepared for. There was nothing in that night really leading up to that I can recall that was like, oh man, this is going to be, a life changing night for me. And so, but as a ninth grader, I knew, all right, emotions are high. This has been a long week, so I'm not going to go forward just in case this is an emotional thing. But over the course of the next 2 weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about this. Now, and also at that phase in my life, there was nothing that I thought about consistently for 2 weeks, really, except for the Dallas Cowboys. But so for me, moving from that experience and really just daily in my prayer and devotional life, just continually came up. I had this growing desire to serve the Lord in that way that was kind of sparked that night, that I believe was from a moment of calling. And so this desire was growing. I was seeing the Lord through his word begin to wash away some of my suspicions. And then 2 weeks later, I went to my youth pastor and I said, Brian, listen, here's what happened 2 weeks at camp. And I haven't told anybody, but I cannot shake this feeling. I feel entirely ill equipped. I feel entirely unworthy, but I do feel called and I want to respond in obedience to that. Am I crazy or do you see that? And he said, Robbie, I want to affirm that in you. That's something that I've been praying for, that I do see that God can use you in that way. And so he's like, listen, you're going into fifth grade. Let's have you continue serving. You're going to stack more chairs than ever. You're going to, lead in ways that might seem small to you, but they're going to have a big impact. And so really the next big moment of decision for me was as I continued throughout high school. This decision started to get more real as I was wrestling with different things that a lot of high schoolers go through. But then when I'm deciding on a college, and I had a lot of friends that were going to different schools in North Carolina, App State, like our friend Lane went to, and ECU and other places. And there was a temptation for me to go to a place that I could kind of have some familiarity, and that was fine for other people. But Liberty had a youth ministry major, and I just really felt strongly that if I was called into ministry and I had the opportunity to go to a place where I could pursue training and equipping for that specifically, then a step of concrete obedience for me into that would be going to Liberty. And God opened those doors. He affirmed that. He gave me friendships and opportunities along the way. But I think that's part of the process. Sometimes, people sense a calling or a direction, and we need some of those ways of affirmation, whether it's through mentors, whether it's through sometimes us taking some practical steps that would allow us to go through those doors into whatever God may be leading us to. So Liberty was a big step. And then the neat thing was, as I took steps into internships and different opportunities, God has continued to affirm that. And so that gives me a great deal of confidence even now that I'm doing exactly what I'm called to be doing, and there's nothing else that I could really find joy in. So So I don't know if just because you mentioned COVID, and if I'm answering this question in the wrong direction, then that's fine. But um, recently, I've just been trying to continue to do the right biblical things, both in my life and in leadership. I think COVID brought up a lot of great questions for leaders and for believers of like, what is key in our involvement in church? What is key in what we should be pushing out to others that are maybe in our ministries or even in our circle of lives? And so rather than overthinking things, just figuring out what's the best way that I can make a kingdom impact. And so, it's funny because in the beginning, everybody was, especially in the youth ministry world, kind of hopping on, different trends. Of, okay, we got to do this on our social media. We got to do, put out these different formats of online service to make a huge impact. And I felt kind of entirely under equipped to do any of those things. I mean, I remember I used to do a trick shot Tuesday that lasted like 2 weeks because I found out that trick shots are really hard to do. And so I just tried to discover in that time, who has God made me to be? What's a way that I can serve faithfully in this season? And not so much overthinking it, but just using what I have to make the biggest impact. So well, humility is never a thing that I've had any trouble with. So I don't understand. No, I'm just kidding. Um, so Craig Rochelle, a few months ago, I heard him say that he never felt too old and he never felt too young. So like kind of in this zone where he never felt like he was, or sorry, he's always felt too young or too old. So he's never felt like he's just been in the right spot. And um that is not just an age comment. I think for me, I've never been exactly where I want to be, whether it's in my preaching or whether it's in the way that we have discipleship groups or you there I've never been in a place where there's been an absence of people in need of Jesus. And so there is an element where you can feel unsatisfied daily. And so I'm trying to take that dissatisfaction with my kingdom impact and realize, okay, Jesus, I want to be an instrument in your hands daily for whatever you may have, hour by hour, moment by moment. Help me be available, help me be wise, help me be dependent on you. And so I think there is a level that Satan can tempt us, kind of as the old hymn says, Satan can tempt us to despair. And I'm trying to allow the Holy Spirit to actually use that to say, you know what, this is just dependence. This is me depending on you every step of the way, no matter what area that looks like. And so that's what I'm hoping for. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah, so I'm definitely not perfect at it, and I'm still learning how to say no to things. But one of the things that we have done is we have some really specific things that are immovable. And so if you look at what some of our priorities are, they're kind of set in stone on a weekly basis. And so that's just kind of a block that's like unavailable 9 times out of 10. And so that helps some of those things for our families. That helps me, not be away too much from the kids for different times when they need me. And also in this season of life, we're learning that there's kind of some heavier moments of the day where it's like, hey, me being around, me helping in the mornings, getting the kids like ready to school, all those things can be really important times. And so we're figuring out what we need there. But I think taking our schedule and saying, hey, listen, if we don't block this out, then something else is going to take it. And so trying to be intentional with that and just working through that's been hard for me because I think nobody likes to disappoint people. Nobody likes to seem unavailable. I also try not to describe myself as busy just because I think that can be like a buzzword that people excuse themselves from anything from. You'll definitely hear me use it sometimes, but when it comes to just kind of that reality of the phase of life, I'm trying to make sure that the things that are non-negotiable, the things that are most essential, are things that kind of have a prioritized, immovable step. And then naturally, you got things like, if you go to church every Sunday, then that's going to hit the same gap. Even, if you're in on Wednesday night or different things that happen in your life, if you start to say, all right, these are the things that are non-negotiable for my spiritual well-being and for my entire health, that really helps everything else be prioritized in your proper perspective, because that helps secondary and third level things not slip into what's primary. So I don't think that this is a rule for everyone. And also I believe that, at least from what I've experienced on this side of the coin, that when you're taking in the word, it's not like one area doesn't spill into the other. I mean, we have one heart. So, and especially when you're preaching, when you're leading, you want to lead from the heart. So that some of those things from my personal devotional time are an outflow. One of the things that I do at least 5 days a week is I've got a reading plan, and then a journal system that goes with it that helps me not only internalize the word. There's an application for that every day that's like something that I hope I will specifically accomplish in response to what I've read. I like that because that really helps me personally think, like, let me not just be a hearer of the word, but let me respond in faith as a doer. But then from that, I've also got some habits for outside of those 5 days. And so, aside from the journaling and the reading plan, I really like doing the Psalms in a month. You guys know that you can read 5 chapters of Psalms a day and knock it out every month. And then if you do one Proverbs a day, then most months you can do the entire book. And so Those are great practices as well. But I try to keep those things separate because for me, I think it protects my personal holiness in some ways. I think it helps me make sure that I'm not just going to God in hopes that He'll give me some material, but actually in hopes that I will love Him more, as I'm called to do. And so those are some things that I do try to be intentional about. So, like, there are times in the week that I have set aside that are for reading, that are directed towards teaching, in the same way that I've got time set aside that's directed just for my soul. I expect that to flow over, but I do try to be intentional about that. And some people have really strong convictions about that, of like, your sermon prep time has to be entirely separate. Some people have strong convictions that they are inseparable. And I think for me, with my personality, it's just important for me to know that I'm going to Jesus as His child, and not as somebody that's just hoping to get some more material for my next message. So I would say that one thing that could be really simple and helpful is, if you maybe are a new Christian, or if you've been in the church for a while and you're at a place where you would say, hey, I don't really know where to start, get with some others. I bet there's somebody else that is around you in your friend group or age group, and maybe take a stab at vulnerability and just say, hey, listen, I've been trying to read, or I've had a desire to read, but I don't know where to start. Would you get in this with me? And I would say, I would. Some people say start in the Gospel of John, and that's fine. That's a great place to start. You could even start at the beginning. Start in Genesis, and a lot of times we map out plans from January 1st, and it's kind of like, if you miss the 8 ball on that, you got to wait till next year. Start where you're at. Pick a reasonable pace. I'm a Enneagram 7, so a lot of times when I pick up something new, I'm like, all right, you know what? Let me go for it full blast. So there's been times where I've been in that season, and I'm like, I'm gonna read the Bible in 2 months, cover to cover, and that may happen. And if that happens, that's great. But I would say, find somebody to read through it with. If you have questions, write down the question as you are reading and look for an answer. That will increase your hunger, but also that will help you. There are times where I've gone through a passage, I've gotten to the same question in that passage for the 5th time, and I've just never addressed it. And it's like, well, if we really have that hunger, that desire to know God and to understand His truth, we have plenty of resources here in America to get those questions answered well. And it may literally be the friend that you're reading through the Bible with. It might be somebody who leads your group. It might be somebody on staff at your church. It might be some good free online resources. So I think thinking through that is helpful. Yeah, I don't really use Twitter very much. I don't really use Facebook. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's Robbie, Robbie, and then Dawson, and then there's a little underscore at the end, because I think just plain old Robbie Dawson was already taken. And you'll see a lot of cute pictures of my kids, and every now and then you'll see something that is hopefully helpful on there too. So
You're very productive.
All right. Love you, buddy. We'll talk to you soon.